All right, good evening, everybody. Hello and welcome to our session on natural pests and disease management tonight with myself, Kat, from the My Smart Garden program. I would, of course, like to start by acknowledging that we are presenting My Smart Garden from Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung land. The people of the Greater Kulin Nations are the traditional owners of the land and the skies and waterways as well. So we pay our respects to their elders, past and present. And in the context of tonight's topic, it also feels quite relevant to mention that in the process of colonisation, which is of course ongoing, lots of new pests and diseases were introduced to this country that had a really significant, very damaging effect to Indigenous plants and food systems for Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people. So I'd like to acknowledge those as well tonight. So this program that you have joined is My Smart Garden, and we're a multi-council collaboration across the city of Naarm, also known as Melbourne, and we're here to help you get more value out of your home garden spaces, whether that's a small balcony in the inner city or whether it's a traditional suburban larger garden, or whether you're renting or whether you own your place. And we do this by helping you grow food and create habitat for Indigenous plants and animals, also reduce your water use and reduce waste as well, and also protect your home from extreme weather, which we know is becoming more of an issue. So tonight's topic is under that umbrella. We hope you enjoy it, but also please check out www.mysmartgarden.org.au, where you'll find lots more of these free workshops presented by a whole range of presenters for your viewing entertainment. And you can also come and see us in person as well sometimes. So I've got a few goals for tonight's session. The first one is for you to have a few ideas for some of the common pests, particularly ones that are around right now. And in giving you some of those ideas, there'll be a range of different techniques that we cover that can apply to a lot of different pests that we may not mention tonight as well. So it'll be a sense of going through the general sort of approaches that we can take for pests. I'd also like you to get to know a bit more about the garden ecosystem and specifically about the other creatures that aren't pests that may be very helpful for you, that you can encourage in order to get more of a balance going and then minimize the amount of work and intervention that you need to do. And so the other thing that we'll be doing tonight is a bit of a strategy. So we've got some short-term interventions to, help you out in a bit of a tight spot when you start to panic because you see your seedlings disappearing. That's happened to me many times. And then we'll actually look at, well, what are some longer-term approaches that we can put in place that are more preventative for future seasons for us as well. So I hope that sounds good. Throughout the session, if you'd like to pop questions in the chat, I've got it open and I'm going to try to keep an eye on it. And if I catch something that's on topic and I think we've got enough time, I will cover it immediately. And if not, I'll be here at the end until you've got all of your questions answered. So feel free to hang on and we can have some longer chats then if needed as well. I also know that there's always experienced gardeners who join in these sessions, and I really like to hear your own tips as well. So if you've got something that works for a particular pest, feel free to pop that in the chat. It's really great for everybody to hear a range of solutions for the topic at hand. All right, so let me get a different set of slides up for you. And hoping now you can all see my beautiful caterpillar that I did a little photo shoot with at home. There we go. So this is us ready to get going. Okay, so as I said, we're going to look tonight at some of the more common pests, quick fixes, then prevention through longer term approaches, and finally planning your strategy. And I'm hoping that you can go from, the sorts of pest-ridden holy cabbages in the top left to a crop that looks more like the bottom right, which is my before and after results of learning to manage the pests that show up on cabbages. And it's not to say that you won't have any damage, but yeah, hopefully there's enough to give you a yield and keep you motivated for future. That's the goal. So I've got lots of photos to show you tonight, and here's one that I do think is great to start off with. And so I have a question for you, and feel free to pop your answers in the chat. Whose are these eggs? Does anyone recognize them? I'm going to leave a pause there. Hopefully, there's some fingers typing. These tiny little yellow eggs, couple of millimeters, little football shapes, quite shiny. I'm wondering if anyone can recognize them. Looking at the number of participants, and there's 77. Yes. Yeah. So, okay. So this is cool. So we have some answers here. Ashley, yeah, there's answers that are correct. It's not the ones that normally get put in, but I'm really thrilled actually that you've picked it up. And so let me go through the slides and show you some of the things that come out of these eggs. Oh, I've just jumped. Okay, sorry. I'm just going to go back to that in a minute. So when we're identifying our pests, the first things we need to do are examine the leaves and try and find out what kind of damage is being caused. So for example, what are the chew marks? Are there any silvery trails that are being left? Yeah, what are the sorts of patterns that are showing up? We can also look underneath the plant, have a look for droppings, and you get quite good at this after a while. I can pick like a snail dropping and the difference between that and a caterpillar dropping, and like earwig frass, or the range of different poos that small insects put out. And yeah, you can also have a look for any trails and things like that. Something else that can help you if you're not sure is to take a captive. And I have occasionally done this with eggs and things that I've found in the garden, like actually put them inside a little jar and just watch what comes out, which is an option for you. And sometimes the wrong thing comes out, which is a bit of a cliffhanger, and I'll leave that for later on, but it's very surprising how often that happens. You can also ask on social media, of course, and there are some quite fantastic garden groups that people delight in helping other people identify things. Also, iNaturalist as well is quite a good app as well. Something I've done a few times is a reverse image search on Google. So if you take a photo and you're happy to upload it into the Google app, it will actually go back and match that image and see where it can find similar images. And sometimes you'll find one that's actually labeled. Be careful, sometimes they're labeled incorrectly, but you could actually pick it up through that as well. You may also have field guides of some insects or animals that you can use. And if all of those things fail, I actually have one more trick up my sleeve to show you later. But you could also use the Museums Victoria ID service. And the crazy creature that you can see there on the right-hand side is one that I'd never seen before. I had an inkling of what it might be. It's like a parasitic wasp. But had never seen anything quite like it. And I sent this photograph and one with a scale, like a ruler next to it, along to Museums Victoria. And a couple of weeks later, they got back to me with a professional identification, which was enormously helpful. I actually photographed this inside the house, and you can see it on one of my little architraves there. And it turns out that this is a creature that is a predator of wood borers. So, in other words, the things that want to eat the house, this is one of the predators that keeps them under control. So, I actually felt a bit silly because I had moved it outside, but now I wish that it was inside because that's where it would be doing the most useful work for me. So there's a range of ID methods that you could use to try to identify something that you're not sure about. The other thing is you can go out at night. So if we come back to those eggs, and there were a few guesses in the chat. For those of you who weren't sure, this is what hatches out of those eggs. And this eventually pupates and starts to look like this. And then when it hatches out as a fully grown adult, it looks like this. So yes, it's a ladybird, and we had some wonderful correct guesses in there from Shifra, and who else? From Mary, congratulations. It's very common for people to say a cabbage white butterfly because the eggs actually do look remarkably similar. The difference here is that they are quite shiny and they are laid in a cluster. And in this case, if you were able to spot it, they're actually laid on a carrot flower. And carrot flowers turn out to be the preferred breeding ground site of ladybirds, or at least one of. Yeah, that's a shortcut. If you've got them all over a carrot flower, it's quite likely. Uh, okay. Um, Yeah, so here's one of the grown-ups. And the reason why we're so excited about ladybirds is because, as you can see here, they suck the guts out of aphids. And in fact, many things want to suck the guts out of aphids. That's the key message from tonight. So ways that we can encourage these predators is going to form a key part of the session a little bit later on. Um, One of the things here, of course, is if you don't recognize something, try not to kill it because unfortunately the eggs and things that we see out in the garden are just as likely to be neutral or actually helpful for us as they may be harmful. So randomly squashing eggs is actually likely to be doing you a disservice in the long term. You may actually be killing off beneficial insects that you need to help. Now I can see a comment from Mary in the chat of wanting to bring back willy wagtails as natural predators, particularly with Queensland fruit fly. We will actually talk about birds later on in the session, Mary, and how important they are. So I'll have some ideas coming up for that as well. Now, I did say going out at night, one of the key ways to identify pests in the garden. So when I thought that I might have one or two snails on my cabbages, I went out at night to have a look. And the reason that I did that is because so many of our pests are active only at night. That's when they can hide from us. And it's also when a lot of birds are less active. So it's an opportune time for them. And it's a different world out there. It really is. You'll be quite shocked sometimes when you go out and have a good look around your garden. So I go out with a headlamp torch and some gumboots, and in this case, I thought I had a couple of snails. It turns out there were, I don't know, maybe 100 or so chomping through the cabbages. And I also discovered on the right-hand side lots of earwigs as well, which I hadn't quite clued in, and they were also causing quite a bit of damage. So in this case, when you spot them, if they're larger like snails, sometimes the best approach is just to pick them off by hand. And that's got a proper term, hand picking. It's so much faster than you going away and trying to devise a trap or make a spray or do something like that. Just pull them off. And people either squash them with gumboots like I do, save them to feed to chickens sometimes if you've got chickens that will eat them, or yes, you can drop them into a bucket of soapy water as well. Now, one thing what we want to talk about early on here is the right time for implementation. So it's so much easier to manage small problems than it is to manage big ones. And one of the things with pests is they often breed up incredibly quickly. So we're talking about hundreds, potentially hundreds of new snails from every snail that we leave out there unsquashed in the garden. And even though I quite like snails and I wouldn't squash them outside my place, at home I'm absolutely ruthless because I have seen slug and snail egg piles like this before. And so these little clear bubbles that you can see here, if you've ever turned over a brick or seen these, that's what they are. They're the eggs of slugs and snails. And within a year or so, we can have hundreds. So the maths are not in your favor if you leave them. So my tip here is to learn the peak breeding times for pests and start managing their populations early, or at least several weeks before you're planning on planting seeds or seedlings, because by the time you've put your seeds and seedlings out, if you haven't managed pests, then they're likely to copy hit. So yeah, you'll be setting yourself back, unfortunately, on the progress. One thing though that is tricky is that there's sort of no black and white with nature. There's only kind of shades of grey and nuance. And something quite interesting about this photograph here is for people who know this slug, you will actually know this it's a leopard slug, and leopard slugs also eat other slugs. And I've only seen one leopard slug at home once in my garden, but they are common throughout the suburbs in our city. I have a lot of giant yellow slugs. They look a bit gross, to be honest. I'm still not really into them, but I have never ever seen a giant yellow slug eating any of my vegetables. I find them in the mulch layer, and I find them in my worm farm, but they are a species of slug that is purely interested in things that are decaying already, and they're actually part of the natural decomposition food web of things that break down things into humus or into compost and feed the soil. So yeah, so those slugs, I don't tend to worry about those. And once you start learning more and more about the individual species involved here, you can be a little bit more selective, and that reduces your work and also sometimes means that they're preying on some of the other things that are a problem. There's a comment in the chat. I hear that if you kill a snail, it will have up to 1,000 eggs. So that's quite high. I'm not sure about that, Paulina. There is definitely a myth, though, that if you squash a snail, it will, somehow create more and more babies after you've squashed it. And that just it has to be a myth that is actually just not possible. And I can, just cite with clarity from having managed snails here for a long time that I've been squashing lots, and I certainly have not found them piling up in the garden. No, so squash with confidence. All right, so let's go a little bit further into slugs and snails because they are one that is really common, and right now is the peak time for them. What do we know about slugs and snails? The first thing is that they tend to like these sort of dark, preferably a little bit damp, sometimes crevices. So here's the rim of one of those classic black pots, which is a really common hiding place for them. A little bit gross, but you can also see there's some snail poos. So if you see these lying around, then you know that a snail is likely to blame. And yeah, slugs are similar, although slugs, I understand, are more nomadic, and snails tend to return to particular favourite hiding places time after time. So, with this knowledge in mind, having observed this, what we can do is make it a lot more convenient for us to check hiding places and to clear them out. So, for example, these black pots are a little bit tricky to check and to clear. Uh, so what I will do instead is I'll find a nicer, easier pot to lift up, and I'll put that in the garden beds around plants. And sure enough, a couple of days, sometimes they're full of pests, and I can go and clear them out more easily. Looking in the chat here, Penny Woodward, who's great gardener, has said they if you squash a snail with eggs inside it into the dirt, it's likely this will produce more snails. I'm going to assume then that you haven't actually properly squashed it, you've just buried it, and in that case, maybe those snails could hatch. But yeah, again, I am quite confident that if you properly squash a snail, it's not reproducing after that. So yeah, thank you, but yeah, I'll stand by that one. Yes, another gardener here commenting that they've got a place that they know that slugs tend to hide, and they go and clear it every couple of days and check them. Yep, so that's really, really good practice. As well, with my garden design, I've gone from having an early garden design that was actually edged by individual bricks that were loose. And that was a bit of a nightmare because under each one and between each one was a perfect hiding spot for things like slugs and snails. And one of the benefits of changing to a raised timber bed, which I did for other reasons, is that there are now really easy to check hiding places. So here there's some dichondra just going around the base of the beds, and where the dichondra was up against the timber is a favored hiding spot, but also really easy for me to check. So that's an example where I just go in and clean out the whole lot as soon as I found them. Something else I do for slugs and snails, besides hand picking and checking their habitat, is I'll set beer traps as well. Now, personally, I've really only found these effective for slugs. I get the odd snail in there, but certainly nothing like the number of snails I know there are around sometimes. So I'm not quite sure why and if you're the same, but yeah, I think, yeah, more of a slug trick in my experience. Now, beer traps work because slugs and maybe snails are attracted to the yeasts in the beer and will then often fall in and drown after they've had a bit of a taste of it. And you can buy commercial traps, but I find it just as effective to get a jar and put, say about 4 or 5 centimeters of stale beer in the bottom, and then just push that at an angle into the ground. And the reason why we do that on an angle is just so that when it rains or if you water by hand, the beer doesn't get diluted, so it lasts a little bit longer. And if you'd rather drink your beer rather than give it to slugs, you can sometimes go to a local pub and say, "Will you pour off the drip tray for me?" Or, it doesn't need to be premium drinking beer at all. But that's a good passive technique. But yeah, it's often not as fast and effective as just pulling them off by hand. Now, if you keep just a tab on the slugs and snails throughout the year, you might find that in a small garden you can actually keep on top of them and they never build up to a point that's a problem. Uh, the other thing that I will do for slugs and snails sometimes is put a little cloche over my seedlings at this time of year while I'm still getting the last of them that I can. And that'll just protect my small seedlings until they get a little bit larger. And then after that, they can withstand a little bit of damage. Um, yeah, there's a comment in here from Belinda. Can you use a yeast solution to catch them instead of beer? I've definitely heard of people fermenting their own sugar solution, and so maybe sugar and water and a little bit of bread yeast in there and letting it ferment, Belinda. So give that a go. I think the alcohol might be important for actually killing them, though. So that's why beer is commonly being used. And I can see some things that are not quite on the topic that we're on. So we'll come back to those at the end of the session. Okay, so while we're also talking about snails, it's a good chance for me to talk about biosecurity because one of my lessons in my own garden here has been that I have accidentally introduced some pests, which is a real headache. So here we've got a selection of snails from my garden, and the ones which I don't remember seeing when I first lived here are these small conical shell snails on the right-hand side of the image. And these ones are incredibly frustrating because, of course, they're so tiny. They're really hard to spot and they're really hard to clean up by hand picking. And I may not have seen them, initially, but now there's lots of them. So they have certainly built up in numbers. And I suspect what's happened here is either they have come in on, potentially on like a pot or something that's been brought in, or maybe on some produce that I've bought in from elsewhere, from maybe swapping with some other gardeners, which is a real shame. So biosecurity we tend to think about in terms of airports, but it's just as relevant at home. And I would argue that we need to take some reasonable steps just to avoid accidentally bringing in pests and diseases. And this is things like if someone gives you home garden produce, inspect it really carefully and make sure that if there is anything in there, you destroy it and you don't accidentally let it escape into your garden. That could mean, if you do find something, that you heat or you freeze it before you compost any scraps. And so, for example, one year I was preserving some tomatoes that I'd bought from a local farmer, and I found a new type of caterpillar inside one of those tomatoes. And I made sure that I actually boiled all of those scraps before then putting them in the compost to avoid having a new tomato crop pest at home. Biosecurity experts would also say scrubbing your boots with soap and water is really good, and especially if you've been somewhere where there's known diseases as well. I've also been known to spray my boots with some methylated spirits. Do that before hiking as well, by the way, because a lot of diseases get brought into yeah, really precious natural areas on boots. And soil is really the major culprit. So if you're swapping plants with someone. Swapping them a cutting that's rooted in water would be safer, or swapping some seeds would be safer, or potting it up in some commercial potting mix without your own soil would be safer as well. And also on this topic, of course, while I understand people really care about precious varieties and want to move them, between countries and over borders, I just want to remind you that the quarantine restrictions are there to protect farmers and also to protect gardeners like yourselves, because one of the most precious things we have in this country is a sea boundary that prevents a lot of pests and diseases from coming in. And then we have, of course, quarantine officers who are there, actually trying to protect farmers from things that might actually destroy whole industries. So if you're not already aware of it, even when you go interstate, there's interstate quarantine, and you can look up what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and call a hotline to ask if it's okay to move something. And it really is in everyone's interest for that quarantine system to stay strong. Okay. All right. Next thing we'll look at is acceptable damage. So I've got three silver beet leaves here in ranging damage from left to right. And I'm curious to know, which ones would you eat and under what circumstances? What do you think? What are you comfortable with? Yeah. And there's not a right or wrong answer here, but a few of you are saying all of them. And that's really great to hear. I wouldn't be surprised if people start feeling a bit uncomfortable with the third one here. For sure, it's got a lot of holes in the leaves. But yeah, all of them, when they're washed and cooked, are absolutely safe to eat. You should be washing produce anyway. There's a couple of good reasons for that. But I bring this up because we've been absolutely trained by the supermarket system to only accept produce with no damage at all. I feel very lucky to have my mum, who's always said to me, if it's got holes in it, that's a good one, because you know that it hasn't been sprayed. And now, professionally and chatting with people who advise horticulture industry around sprays and trying to reduce sprays, yeah, that's actually really good advice, because there's so many pesticides that are used out there not to prevent crop spoilage, but actually just to prevent cosmetic damage. Yeah, I'd much rather have a leaf with a hole or two in it than have a leaf that's been sprayed maybe 3 times a week with a various list of pesticides to just prevent that little hole from appearing. And of course, there are ecological consequences for all that spraying as well. So, what we're aiming for with this session is management rather than control. The idea that we could completely control pests in any kind of food garden is a bit of a fantasy. We are not in charge, but we can manage, and that's what we'll try and do. And keep in mind that even professional growers, even with all the sprays available, still have quite high rates of damage. And what that usually means is that produce is just wasted and it's not able to be sold, which is a great shame. It really it reduces the efficiency of our food system. Something that also might be a surprise is that I am aiming not for complete, destruction of pests, but I actually want this consistent low level of them. Because if I don't have a low level of pests in the garden, it's just not possible to maintain the predators that I need to create a balanced ecosystem. So I'm quite happy if there's a few holes, as long as we're also getting a crop. We'll look at some options in a minute for what to do if you're not getting a crop. Next thing is, when a pest shows up, the general approach is to research as much as possible about that pest, observe where they're hiding, then do some experiments and start innovating. And so, for example, here we had a season a while ago where there were just earwigs everywhere. And I put my baby seedlings out and I came out at night to check on them, and every one of them had 10 or 20 earwigs and they're just munching away. And that was a pretty hard year, and I had to replant quite a few things. So I did a lot of reading on earwigs. I also observed that they like to nest in particularly bamboo and in these dry, little thin crevices. And so, based on that knowledge, I removed all of the bamboo stakes from my garden that had lots of cracks and things in them, and then used those little pieces of them laid around the garden bed as traps for the earwigs. And so, here we've got a photo of those earwigs being shaken into a container. And actually, it was scary that, yeah, we actually would sometimes tap the bamboo. And yeah, you probably not exaggerating here, you'd probably have about 200 earwigs fall out of one bamboo. Not in everyone, but every couple of days we'd find a colony. And then what we do is go and take that bucket to the quail aviary, where the quail were probably already waiting at the door because they'd gotten onto this routine, and they were like little sort of popcorn snacks for the quail that would go after them. And my partner at the time eventually ended up saying, "Oh, we better slow down on the earwig harvesting because we might not have enough for the quail next year." So it's a good example of the problem becoming the solution. And after some observation, then being able to turn them actually into a resource, and certainly have an effective method to deal with them if they come up again. So, the more you understand about the pests, the more effectively you'll be able to experiment, and the faster you'll come up with some kind of a strategy that works. Okay, next one I want to talk about here are caterpillars, one of the other really tricky ones that gardeners are usually coping with. There's lots of different types, as you can see here, and they, of course, come from moths and from butterflies. Here is an example of a cabbage white butterfly egg. And just going back to those ladybirds eggs at the start, you'll see how similar they are in shape, little footballs, but they're a little bit paler and not shiny, and they tend to get laid individually, scattered across the leaf. But that's the kind of egg that we're looking for. This is probably very hard for you to see if you're on a small screen, but I'm just going to circle it with my mouse in the bottom right corner. That is one of those eggs pretty soon after hatching, just to show you the tiny little cabbage white caterpillar that it's become. So they like to hide in sneaky places down stems, and then they gradually grow in size to something like this one in the center on the top row up here. So, what are we going to do about caterpillars? Firstly, this is an example of like a certified companion plant for some Australian conditions. And people often ask me, what do we think about companion planting? Should I plant this with that? And use one of those charts. And my general response to that is that the concept is not a bad one, but unfortunately, a lot of the relationships in companion planting charts, where we're supposed to have some kind of a beneficial interaction by planting these things close together, it's not well documented what that is anymore. And it could have come from a gardener who is in a completely different country where there are different pests or different climate and different cycles of those pests. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you will get that beneficial relationship in your garden. Um, However, planting a really diverse garden that has lots of variety, lots of flowers, which we'll talk about later, is itself a good companion planting plan. So I tend to use companion planting on the garden scale and talk a lot about diversity and having a lot of plants to attract in various predators, not necessarily about these specific one-to-one relationships. That said, this plant here became quite famous a few years ago on Gardening Australia because it was researched by a university who found that caterpillars, sorry, the butterflies and moths that laid their eggs on this plant did so in preference to some of the common garden brassicas. So instead of laying eggs on your cabbages or your kale or broccolis or cauliflowers, they would prefer to lay them on this plant, which is called Bulbaria vulgaris or Barbaria verna. So it acted as a bit of a trap, which is handy. And then for some types of caterpillar eggs, unfortunately not for cabbage white butterflies, but for a few other types, they showed that the caterpillars that started to eat the plant after hatching died. So it kind of gave them gastro, and therefore it was actually a kind of toxic crop for them. It also happens to be quite a delicious plant on its own, so I tend to grow it here just for salad. I have to say, personally, I don't know if I've noticed that kind of interaction, but nonetheless, there's one that has a little bit of testing behind it and something that you could try. So I'm going to put in the chat window, and it always autocorrects to Barbara, but Barbaria vulgaris or Verna is again the scientific name. Okay, next thing we can do for caterpillars is just go out and squash eggs. And there is a tiny one just in there, if you can see my mouse. So it's just on the leaf. And if you've got good eyesight, you might just be able to squash them. Um, that could be tricky if you've got a huge garden that's full of brassicas, but if you've only got a couple of plants and you have the time, that's as good a solution as any. So just keep in mind, if the egg gets squashed, then we of course don't have a caterpillar hatching from it. One that I tend to use for a larger number of plants is to use insect netting and actually exclude the butterflies and moths from that bed. Because if you can stop them from landing on the plants, then they won't be able to lay eggs. And it is really important that the netting is not touching the plant leaves because they can lay eggs through it. But yeah, this is a very, very effective technique if you can put all of your common plants that are susceptible under one net and tuck it in really tightly. If that doesn't work, then one other thing that I have used is this spray that's on screen here. This one, Dipel, it's called, or BT, is a soil-borne bacteria that is toxic to caterpillars. And so they produce it commercially and you can spray it. And then any caterpillar that ingests some of that spray from the leaf will then stop eating and die within a few days. And if you're an organic broccoli farmer, you're basically reliant on this product for your business model. In the home garden, I use it as a last resort, but I find it really helpful on plants where I can't net all of them and I also can't find all the caterpillars. So in my tomato vines that go about 6 meters high and this giant kind of bed full of climbing tomatoes and all of these little looper caterpillars that are hiding in amongst it, I needed Dipel for a while to manage them because they were eating the buds of the tomatoes before they'd even turn into fruit. These days, however, I have an even cooler way of controlling them, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But yeah, this one's available if you need it, keeping in mind it is a general caterpillar killer. So even native butterflies and things like that, you would kill their caterpillars if you had it on something that they were eating. So use it really carefully. Also keep in mind that because it's a living bacteria, you need to store it carefully. So make sure that you don't keep it in a garden shed or somewhere that it's heating up. This is one to be keeping in a safe place indoors where it can stay nice and cool and dark until needed. Okay, next I'll talk about mites. We are, of course, coming into tomato season, and I know tomatoes are one of the crops that gets us gardeners more excited than most. But I've also noticed that most tomatoes in our city end up with tomato russet mite. And most gardeners don't know it exists because it is microscopic and you can't see it with your naked eye. What you can see though are lots of leaves turning brown and going really crispy dry. And most people actually think that this is just a natural part of the tomato's life cycle, but it's actually just a massive outbreak of tomato russet mite. And if you control it, you'll find that the leaves actually stay green right down to ground level for the whole season. So here's some of my tomatoes. There's the tomato trellis I was talking about before, which is, yeah, definitely a good 6 foot high, and then they come tumbling down the side again. And I will always get russet mite showing up, unfortunately, but I do manage it through spraying this stuff, wettable sulfur, roughly once a month from when I first start to notice it arriving, which is often in, about mid-November or so for me. This sulfur is sort of borderline organic, so we don't want to use too much of it, but it's not a nasty spray or anything like that. It's quite widely used in organic agriculture. But yeah, I find the wettable sulfur is an important aid because my production from this garden bed went from about 17 kilos of tomatoes up to about 30 kilos for this one garden bed after managing for russet mite. So significantly improving the crop, which makes it really worthwhile. I've got yeah, some of my tomatoes in the top right corner there to share. So, russet mite thrives in hot, dry, and dusty conditions, which tends to be, a lot of our summer. And yeah, this is the sort of thing that will keep them at bay, and yeah, is worth using. Um, all right, next we've got aphids, whitefly, and scale. And I've just seen in the chat, Mary's pointing out not bee friendly. Yeah, okay, so yeah, there might be some circumstances where it's not appropriate to use. And also sometimes for things like this, we can spray at night time when bees aren't active. And then at least the bee itself is not going to get the sulfur on it. I'm not sure if that makes a difference in this case, Mary, or not, but I'm sure you'll let us know. Great. Okay, so for aphids, whitefly, and scale, these are all very small, sap-sucking, soft-bodied pests, and you can see some whitefly there on my tomato leaf, and that's what they look like. Aphids, whitefly, and scale tend to create this secondary problem of sooty mold here. And what's going on here is that these pests all produce a sweet, sugary liquid, and then that attracts fungus, which comes to eat on it, that creates this black powder. So if you have, say, a citrus, which would be really common, that's been infested with aphids, you can show up later and not see any aphids, but you'll see sooty mold, which is kind of an indicator that the aphids have come and gone. Sooty mold, by the way, you can just wash it off. And if there's no more aphids, then it won't reappear. But yeah, if there are aphids, then we have to deal with them. Uh, Here's some appearing on some geranium leaf as well. Now, you often see these pests in conjunction with ants, and I haven't taken one of ants in my own garden yet, but here's a random scale from somewhere in the world with ants all over it. And what's going on here is the ants are actually farming the scale, and they do this with aphids as well. And this is pretty remarkable, but they are literally like cattle for the ants. And the ants get that sugary liquid and then use that to feed their colony. There's also, I've seen an amazing video of rainforest ants where they'll actually pick them up when there's rain coming and they'll go and shelter under a leaf. And then when the rain's gone, they'll take them back out to fresh pasture. And they have special ways of holding, the pregnant aphids so that they're not damaged and things like that. So it's a really beautiful, intricate relationship that they've developed over time. But for us gardeners, it can be a real problem because these sorts of small pests have got loads of predators that want to come and hunt them for us. But if there's ants there, the ants will protect them. So all of our, work at trying to attract predators is less effective. So one of the main things is if you see ants, we want to see if we can stop the ants from farming that colony. And one way we can do this is using a horticultural glue product like this one on the screen here. And this is like a non-setting glue, so it remains sticky. So what I do here, so for example, I had aphids all over my nectarine tree last year, and once I'd established that they were getting out of hand and it wasn't just a quick spring infestation, I went and banded the trunk with some masking tape just to sort of protect the trunk and so I could remove it later. And then I'll spread a little bit of this glue in a band around the trunk and prune any branches that are touching something like a fence that they might be able to come in on. And in that way, the ants weren't able to get up the tree trunk anymore. And then the aphids got cleaned up by ladybirds, actually, lots and lots and lots of ladybirds. So just that little intervention can keep them in check. I have also read books where they've said if you can find an ant's nest, just put a shovel in it or something like that, keep them moving house. But yeah, just know that ants are actually undoing some of the work that we're trying to do here, so it can be helpful to control them. I see in the chat Deborah saying she's tried neem oil on whitefly. Not sure if it was that effective, but it did seem to bring the numbers down a little. Yeah, I will say on whitefly, whitefly is one that shows up just every year usually, but rarely in enough numbers to do damage. So it is for me a question of going, or are they actually inflicting any real damage on the crop? And quite often for me, at least, the answer is no for whitefly, so they can stay. And we do have sometimes a particularly bad year for one pest or another. And in those years, maybe I just have to give up on that particular crop. But hopefully, I've got a diversity of plants in the garden so I can still get something else instead. Um, so yeah, whitefly I rarely have to do any control on. And we're talking about sprays now. So it's worth saying that for any spray, and I include neem oil in this, while they can be effective, it's unlikely that they're going to completely control the problem. So the best that you'd really hope for is a bit of a reduction in numbers, Deborah, which sounds like that's probably what you got. So, sprays. Oh, these are often the first response for people, but I'd sort of like to go, well, hopefully they become the last response. And the first ones that I'll go for are simple, cheap, safe homemade options, like the one you can see here, which is a homemade white oil. This is one that I do sometimes use for leaf miner. That's the squiggly lines on citrus plants, for scale, for aphids, things like that. And what I've done is mix up a cup of vegetable oil, like any vegetable oil, and half a cup of dishwashing liquid, hopefully like a nice eco one that's not full of colors and weird scents and things like that. And you shake them together and it turns white, which is what I've got in this bottle. And then when you want to use it, you take a tablespoon or 3 teaspoons and you put it in a litre of water and shake that up. And this basically is like it's like a coating that suffocates the pests. So you need to get it coating the pests and the leaf surface on both sides, and be aware that you don't spray it in hot weather because the oil in it could actually sort of fry your plants. But this one is relatively, cheap, safe, effective, something that I'd try as a first resort for those sorts of issues. If that hasn't worked, if I'm sure that there's enough damage to warrant it, and I'm not going to get a crop if I do nothing, then I might reach for a commercial spray. And the example here is one of the ones that, I very, very rarely use, to be honest, but one that I would use if there was something really, serious going on that was concerning me. And this is a natural pyrethrum product, which is made from the pyrethrum daisy. Now, it's really tricky because there are also synthetic pyrethrums and there are also synthetic carriers that are used sometimes to increase the efficacy of natural pyrethrum. So you'll see a lot of pyrethrum sprays out there and not many are actually natural. But this one I understand is. And it's also carrying an organic certification logo, even though I actually think that certification body is unfortunately maybe shutting down. So I don't know what will go on them in the future. But previous to this, at least, products with this organic certification logo are amongst the ones that I would look at first as my choice. So yeah, this is one of the things that you could do if you need a solution. Keep in mind that none of them are going to give you a fast knockdown. And if you do experience that, then it might be a cause for concern because they're pretty serious, the sorts of chemicals they put in to achieve those results. So you might need to reapply them, and I would never expect that you'll have complete control. Yeah, and it's being pointed out, pyrethrum is toxic to bees. So if you sprayed a bee with it, the bee would die. But yeah, you would spray it at times of day when bees are not active. So yeah, in that not get out there at night time or do it during cloudy weather when bees are all in the hive. Yeah, so keep that in mind. There's no spray out there that doesn't have some sort of adverse consequences, and that's why I only reach for it in the sort of most desperate circumstances. And I'm much more inclined to actually just give up on that crop in that year than I am to go out and buy a product like this. But I do know people always ask me for, what do I do? This precious plant, is covered in something. I've tried everything else. So that's where the pyrethrum would come in for me. It's certainly not before. Okay, a couple of other questions. I might come back to those later on. Okay, so we're going to go back a step here. And this geranium leaf that had some white flies on it. In fact, I looked everywhere in the garden for some white flies or, some other pests and things for this photo. And quite happily, couldn't find any except on this plant. And the reason that they were on this plant is because this plant had sat in a pot for probably 6 months too long. It was bought for a garden working bee and they didn't need it. And then I ended up being given it. And as you can see here, this plant is not happy. It wanted to be in the ground. And because it hasn't got access to very healthy soil, no wonder it's starting to get infested with pests. So the point here is that healthy soil is the foundation of having healthy plants. And quite often people will say, what is wrong with my broccoli? It's covered in aphids. How do I get rid of them? But the point is that maybe that broccoli was not in particularly fertile soil, or perhaps it was not getting enough sun. And those sorts of conditions mean that it's always going to be a bit weak, and weak plants are very attractive for this type of pest. In nature, these pests all have a role, and the role is to start to, take down the things which are not working so that something else can grow in its place. So just keeping that in mind, that's the ecological function of some of these species. And that means that we need to really focus on our design and really focus on healthy soil. I can't go into how to have healthy soil in much detail tonight, but I do encourage you to come to some other My Smart Garden workshops that talk about healthy soil. And a shortcut is that adding lots of compost and mulch, making sure that you've got enough sun and making sure there's enough moisture for the plant that you're trying to grow is usually the foundation of all of it. Okay, so let's move on to Queensland fruit fly now. I know it's already been mentioned in the chat. This is one we particularly need to cover these days because it has become an established pest in Naarm, Melbourne. And it's a very serious horticultural pest that a lot of Australia has been dealing with for quite some time. Now that it's here, it attacks most types of fruit, unfortunately. So things that have a soft flesh seem to be a favourite. Feijoas, if you know the fruit that's on the screen, feijoas are an absolute favourite. But it will also go for things like stone fruit. It loves your nice soft tomatoes, particularly the larger tomatoes. So if you're having problems, then the cherry tomatoes do seem to be a little bit less attractive as a whole. But yeah, really most types of fruit. Also capsicums, which are botanically speaking a fruit. And also, unfortunately, native kangaroo apple as well, which is in the tomato family, Solanaceae. I have also seen that full of Queensland fruit fly, which is a bit devastating as well. So let's have a look at some of the images here. The adult is in the top right corner, of course, and then you'll see the sort of larval stages. One of the things about Queensland fruit fly is the fruit often looks okay on the outside, and it's only when you cut into it that you get this devastating rotting mush full of maggots, which is just awful. So commiserations if you've had that happen to any of your fruit trees. The key, though, is that we don't want to allow another cycle. So if you do discover fruit like this, it's really important that you treat it in some way before you compost it. Otherwise, you're just introducing that pest back again to continue doing this kind of damage. So the standard instructions are to either boil or freeze your infected fruit before composting. And like I've got to say, like a really good gardener that I know has just started drowning things in a bucket, and he's been watching it closely and doesn't think that anything is able to crawl out of the bucket, but that's a little bit experimental. It is a lot easier than boiling or freezing infected fruit, though, so it's probably safer to stick with those methods. People also talk about microwaving if you're sure that it's microwaved enough, or putting your fruit in a black plastic bag in the sun for a week when it's really hot over summer would also do the trick. But yeah, we really need to be quite careful about hygiene now and making sure that we treat fruit. And that would probably mean like just bringing fruit trees down to a size that you can net them safely now as well. So if you've got these really large fruit trees, of course, all the fruit at the top is likely to get infested and then go on and create more damage. So start thinking maybe about whether you can prune your fruit trees down to a manageable size. So let's have a look at some questions. Do chickens eat Queensland fruit fly maggots? I'm sure they would. One of the problems, though, Elena, is that if you dump a whole lot of infested fruit in there, I wouldn't say the chickens would necessarily get all of them before they burrow into the surface. So, yeah, it's a bit of a tough one because they are such a nasty pest. I'm not sure how I feel about trusting it to the chickens. However, chickens actually running under your fruit trees as another layer in protection is a really great idea. So they can catch any that you don't manage to pick up. I think that's a really excellent idea, and for many other pests, including codling moth as well. Question, if the fruit fly is in one piece of fruit, does that mean it is probably in all of the fruit? Not necessarily, Trish. I've had Queensland fruit fly in a few of my large tomatoes, but I've also had a very healthy crop that wasn't affected by them. So no, it does mean they're all at risk, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is infected. Can be a little bit hard to tell because it's almost invisible when they lay eggs, and it's only when they start developing that you'll see the maggots that you can see here. So yeah, applying a 2 mm insect grade net before the fruit becomes susceptible, and that's definitely before it is ripe. And look, the safest time to put the nets on is after the fruit has set, so really, really early in the season. But yeah, you can probably stretch that a little bit, but you'll definitely have to get the nets on quite early if you want to make sure there's no damage. So yeah, that means yeah, quite early on in the season. Now I want to show you a bit of a video here. It's a bit freaky, but the maggots jump. Sure that will have frightened a few people. This is when they're mature. That's one way of knowing if you've got Queensland fruit fly larvae, because I'm not aware of any others that do this. And there's a 20-cent piece for scale in there as well. I've got the adult here. You're sort of unlikely to see the adults very often. They're quite shy and hard to find. But where you may see them is if you've bought some fruit in and they've actually hatched in your fruit bowl. You sometimes see these on your ceiling where they'll tend to sit quite still, in my experience. And you can see it's got sort of a yellow band on the abdomen there as well. Yeah, so really nets are our best option for Queensland fruit fly. And that's why I say it's probably a good idea now to make sure that your fruit trees stay at the size that you can put a net on them quite comfortably. Or do little insect netting sleeves as well. The question is, what do you think about Queensland fruit fly traps? I made some last year and they attracted other things, not Queensland fruit fly. Yes, so that is a problem. There are recipes for homemade traps using fruit juice and things like, I think I've even seen Vegemite and things in there as well. But yes, they do tend to attract a lot of other things as well. You can buy commercial baits. They are effective, but they need to be reapplied quite regularly. And unfortunately, it's likely that Queensland fruit flies, if they're in your area, will sort of just keep coming in from other gardens. So if you're not able to do that kind of management on the scale of your block at least or street, I'm not sure whether they're ever going to match the effectiveness of a net, which is why I'm tending to emphasize the nets for home gardeners from now on. There are also traps which are intended as indicators, and they're sort of a lure that you can check to know if the Queensland fruit flies have arrived yet that year. So they're there, but they're not really intended as a control either, unfortunately. So once again, an insect gauge net of about a 2 mm. That's the sort of protection that we're really looking at for home gardeners now. Okay, so let's move on now to some of the predators that I'd like you to meet. And what we're going to try and do, of course, is deal with any issues that pop up if we have to, but in the longer term, start looking for predators that can help us on the job. And in order to introduce this topic, I've got a video that I would really like to play you. And it's like definitely hoping the sound works on this one. Let me try it out and see.
Our parasitized caterpillar has spent the last 12 days gorging itself. It now appears profoundly obese. But this is not all fat. The glomerata wasp larvae lie just under its skin. Each is the size of a grain of rice, but together they account for over a third of the caterpillar's weight. The larvae have not yet finished growing and need to keep their host alive. So although they feast on the caterpillar's blood, they have been careful not to touch a single one of its vital organs. This uneasy truce will not last. Within days, the larvae are fully matured. Suddenly, they begin to stir into action. For the past 2 weeks, this surrogate womb has protected them, but now they no longer need it. To complete the next stage of their life cycle, they must break out. The caterpillar's thick skin should be a solid barrier to the parasitic wasp larvae. But as their bodies have grown, they have developed tiny, saw-like teeth. These jagged jaws are for one job only: cutting their way out. Stroke by stroke, the larvae slice through the tough layers of skin. At the same time, they release chemicals that paralyze the caterpillar. As the larvae break through, there is nothing it can do. Free at last, the larvae enter a new phase of development. They swiftly spin silken cocoons. These will provide the perfect environment for their final transformation. But ironically, one of the greatest dangers the larvae will face is being themselves impregnated by other species of parasitic wasp. Incredibly, the wounded caterpillar helps them out. Usually, a caterpillar would spin a silken blanket to make its own cocoon. But the parasitized caterpillar spins his blanket on top of the wasp cocoons, giving them an extra layer of protection. Scientists believe the same wasp virus that infected it weeks before has now invaded the caterpillar's brain and caused this bizarre corruption of its normal behavior. Amazingly, the caterpillar's natural aggression is now also exploited by the wasp virus. The caterpillar becomes a bodyguard, actively protecting the cocoons from other parasites. It will watch over them unceasingly until it eventually starves to death.
Whoa, there's some great comments in the chat here. I'm sorry to inflict that on you. Yeah, it is absolute horror movie potential. And in fact, I have seen some horror films that have been based on this concept. Yeah, we're lucky that we don't have, so far that we know of, too many human equivalents at this stage. But yes, parasitic wasps are a real thing. And they are actually, in fact, everywhere if we learn to look after them as well, especially. So here are some examples from my garden. Here we've got 3 caterpillars of different forms. This is a looper caterpillar that I get on the tomatoes quite frequently. And there's 2 trajectories here. The one on the right-hand side is normal, in inverted commas, for a caterpillar. So this one could probably hatch out from this point and become a moth. The one on the left, however, something has gone terribly wrong over here, and now you probably have a sense for what has happened to it. It's been parasitized. This is a different parasitic wasp, and this type actually mummifies the caterpillar as it sort of swells up full of larvae ready to hatch out. It's really quite horrific. So what we're talking about here, these parasitic wasps are in the wasp family, but they are very different to the European wasps that a lot of us are rightfully quite wary of. They do look waspy. So I've got one large one in the photo up the top here for you to have a look at. And this one's got a really good example of the wasp waist. So that really narrow waist that is classic in this sort of group. And it's also got, for the females, a really common thing to have is an ovipositor, which is this long abdomen stick, if you like. And you may recognize this, by the way, from the parasitic wasp that I had identified by Museums Victoria earlier in the session. And they use this egg-laying device to poke into caterpillars or into beetles or aphids and lay their eggs inside them. So if you see something that looks a little bit waspy with a waist and one of these, almost guaranteed to be some kind of parasitic wasp. So you don't need to be frightened of these wasps. They're not looking for you. They're not after your soft drinks. Yeah, as long as you don't poke them, you're unlikely to get bitten. So this one in the bottom left corner, this is what it hatches out into. And you can see just how tiny these parasitic wasps are in this species. They're really, really small. So you're not really going to see them in the garden, but they're there and they're your friends. This one here from my garden is very similar to the one that you've seen in the video. So similar species. And I've found many, many of these over the years. This one, I took a photo and I think it's even got the exit holes in here from where they hatched out. But I've also seen people squash these as well, because it's a very natural reaction to think, oh, there's a caterpillar, there's some eggs there, or they must be bad eggs, and so we'll squash them. But yeah, just keep in mind, caterpillars don't do this. They don't sort of, hover over eggs as a sort of normal part of their life cycle. So when we see this, it's a corruption that's been caused by parasitic wasps. If you see something like this is on the bottom right here, what they look like once the larvae have hatched out. So if you see these, there's nothing left. There's nothing special about this anymore. It's just a fun thing to look at. And again, here's a photograph of what actually hatches out of that type of little larval sac. So once again, very, very small wasps in this case. You're unlikely to see them in the garden, but you'll often see the evidence of them either underneath a caterpillar or that might have previously been hatched out. Just some more photos. I just really can't get enough of parasitic wasp photos. There's one I found here on a silver beet leaf. So that's a caterpillar there. And it looks like, yeah, they might have killed it and have hatched out or something. I don't know what species this is. I'd love someone to tell me if there does happen to be an entomologist or someone else with knowledge on the chat. And then on the right-hand side, in one of these sessions a little while ago, a woman called Sally said, I took this photo of one in my garden and they just hatched out. So thank you to Sally for sharing the photo and letting me share it with you. This is on a leek leaf, I believe. So yeah, they are yeah, really fantastic to have around. And so yeah, the question in the chat, how are parasitic wasps beneficial? Well, they go looking for the next lot of caterpillars or aphids, as we'll have a look at, and they'll just keep reinfecting them and then going on and killing more and more. So what they tend to do is prevent the egg laying of the caterpillar or the moth or the butterfly itself, and thereby keep those numbers at a nice, low, manageable level. Right, so I also want to show you a video that I took while I was in the middle of garden watering. This is usually when a lot of my good observation happens. Uh, and so, yeah, I sort of dropped the hose because I'd seen this new thing show up. I struggled to find a good photo of it, trying to get focus, but there it is. I might just pause it there for you. So yeah, you get excited and you see these things and go, what is that? And what I did with this one is I managed to get this photograph and then I was able to identify it. And what it turns out is this is a black-tipped orange ichneumon wasp. And it turns out to be the pupal parasitoid of the tomato looper. So this is in the tomato patch with some lettuces underneath that you saw in the video. And these looper caterpillars, remember I was saying I had to resort to this commercial spray, the Dipel, to manage them. Well, I actually haven't had to use Dipel for the last couple of years because I never noticed them appearing. And now I'm actually realizing why that might be, because it looks like I've got this new predator that's shown up. So in other words, this parasitic wasp goes and parasitizes the pupal stage of this caterpillar and then will hatch out and go for more. So I couldn't be more excited to have this new friend in the garden. I look forward to observing them. I hope they manage to overwinter, and we'll talk about how to attract them in a minute as well. Maybe one more. Also during some watering when I'm moving slowly and looking at details, I saw a spider running away down a little hole, and then I saw what looked like a parasitic wasp. And so I took a photo and I've zoomed in on it just here. And then a button showed up on my phone. And this is actually what I used for the last one as well. Now I have got an iPhone, so I'm not quite sure if this is available with other phone models, but there's probably apps that are getting better and better now too. But I wanted to highlight for those of you who do have it, in the center there, there's a little magical bug button that shows up. And so I hit the bug button and it says, we think this is an Entypus unifasciatus. I went, wow, what's that? So I looked it up and it does check out. It looks like, may not be the exact species, but certainly within similar family group. And so it turns out that female wasps of this type paralyze large spiders and deposit them in burrows. The wasp lays a fertilized egg upon the spider, and after hatching, the larva feeds on the living but paralyzed spider until maturing into a pupa that overwinters and emerges as a winged adult next summer. So, oh my goodness, you bet that spider was running. That is horrifying. Imagine being paralyzed and then slowly eaten alive. Ugh, no, thank you. So it's not just caterpillars and not just spiders, but lots of other things as well. And just one more common one that you might come across is aphids. This is on a kale plant, and I've turned the leaf over, and there's a kind of bulging, coppery, shiny aphid there. And what's happened to this one is, you guessed it, it's been parasitized. And this isn't my photo, but this is a great expanded photo of the mummified aphid where the larvae has actually hatched out its abdomen. So, so this happens quite a lot, and you can see these with your naked eye, which is really exciting. So it's worth saying things like aphids and also caterpillars, there tend to be a burst of them at this time of year in early spring. It's just a natural cycle. And when you think about it, it makes sense because the predators are not going to wake up without their lunch being ready. So it's normal to start seeing them appear at this time. So I keep monitoring them and have a look at them. But what I'm actually looking for is evidence that the predators are there. So when I sort of turn over a capsicum leaf and I see this, as you can see on the right here, almost every aphid has been parasitized. So I'm not getting involved at all. And if I've just got a couple of parasitized aphids, I'm also not getting involved because it's likely that the next cycles are on their way. And if I start squashing aphids at that point, I might actually be squashing aphids that are incubating parasitized parasitic wasps. And so, yeah, no need to get involved there. So I'd only sort of start squashing aphids or things like that if I don't see any of these and if the plant's starting to look quite sick and damaged. All right, so enough about parasitic wasps. We're going to move on to some others now. These are lacewings, beautiful moth-like insects, but they aren't moths. You can easily confuse them, but they hold their wings vertically rather than horizontally, if that makes sense. And I've got both green ones on the bottom and also brown ones in my garden. And I always forget which one it is when I have to teach it, but one of them lays their eggs on these really fine filaments. So you may have seen these. I'm just holding it up against my knee there that's black to let you see them. Apparently, they lay them on filaments because when these hatch, their young ones are so aggressive that they might cannibalize all their siblings. I don't know if that's true or not, but they certainly are hungry and they go looking for things to eat. And here I've got a picture of one of them that I found. I think these are the brown ones from memory. Now, underneath all of this is one of the lacewing larvae, but all of this stuff that's going on here, uh, believe it or not, they like to suck the guts out of aphids, and when they're done, they stick the empty shells on their back as camouflage. So that, if you can see it, a little circular thing that looks like a little oat or something like that, and there's another one, that is the hollowed out shell of an aphid. And they sort of ramble around the garden with this giant trash heap on their back, going looking for new prey. Really, really special. I can see Nicole saying she's got some of those eggs in her garden and they're now prized editions. So I'm so pleased to hear that, Nicole. All right, other good things in the garden include hoverflies. So you probably know these already. They're like little helicopters that sort of hover around the garden. And hoverflies, they are a fly, but the larvae or the maggots really that they produce, again, like to suck the guts out of aphids. So they do look like a caterpillar or something that might be damaging. Here's one on an aphid-infested fennel plant. I'm just circling. But hoverflies are really good. We want to encourage them in as much as possible. So we've talked about a few here, and there are a lot more, but we've got, ladybirds, we've got hoverflies, parasitic wasps, we've got lacewings. Some of the common threads that attract them to our garden are nectar from small flowers. So what they've got in common is they don't have a very large tongue. So the flowers that are useful to them for nectar, and the adults do need nectar in these species. So yeah, that's what we're really aiming for here to help the adults. And they need little nectar cups. And the sorts of flowering groups that can provide that for us are from this family that has umbel-like flowers. This one's a fennel by the looks of things. Yep, it's a fennel leaf. Actually, there is a hoverfly I managed to capture on its way. If you can see that, it's a bit subtle. This family group, by the way, also includes parsley, which is a really easy one to have around the garden. So parsley and fennel. Carrot is excellent if you let a carrot go to flower. Of course, you won't get the carrot, but yeah, carrots, if you can let one or two flower, really fantastic. There's also Queen Anne's lace, which is not really an edible, but a lot of people have that in the garden as well, and things like coriander and so forth. The next group is daisies, and they can be any daisies really. These are some brachycomb native daisies, so it's nice to do some of these functional roles with Indigenous and native plants where we can. And daisies, even though they look like a big flower, the centre of them has a lot of tiny nectar cups. So they are excellent to have around as well. And the other group is just lots of other small flowers. And the one I often bang on to people about a lot is alyssum, which is this one on the right hand side here. I'm going to spell that in the chat, Alyssum, alyssum. It's a very, very common plant. You can get it at any nursery. I like it because it is really small and compact, so you don't need to take up a lot of garden space with it if you're in a small space. It is tough. In fact, its scientific name is Alyssum maritima. Maritima often speaks to ocean or, like tough oceanside conditions. And it happens to be edible, so you can actually harvest it as a little crop for sprinkling through salads or on desserts. It has like a sort of a light mustard flavour, and it's in the Brassica family for those who know it as well. But also, it flowers nearly all year round. And one of the tricks for providing nectar is we really want things to be available for as much of the year as possible, so these predators don't have to go elsewhere. Because otherwise they'll be coming to my place, and I want them to go to your place and stay there. So see if you can get like a nice flowering calendar of as many of these types as possible, and that will encourage these predators to stick around. They also, as well as some food, they also need some habitat to overwinter in quite often or to live in. And I don't need to provide this at my place because I've got a lot of places for insects to overwinter. This is a timber pile here of salvaged house timbers that I use for building projects. And all of these old nail holes are little houses. And I've also got lots of mulch, chopped up leaf stems, things like that lying on the ground under fruit trees. Lots of sort of loose bark and things lying around. So no need for me to do anything else really. But if you have a garden where there's a lot of tidying up, lots of raking, lots of mowing, it's quite simplified, then you may want to do something like create an insect hotel. If you're trying to tackle, sorry, not tackle, if you're trying to invite a specific creature like a native bee, there are specific designs that you need for those. But for just general insects, like just a range of types of habitat for them is good. I also just wanted to show you when you leave undisturbed nesting sites, you get lovely surprises. Like here's a praying mantis in the act of laying an egg sac, and that's what the egg sac looks like on the right hand side. So I really want to show you these because yeah, often people worry about them and don't know what they are. But this is a praying mantis oothica, and we can get apparently several hundred babies hatching out of this in spring. Some of them will get eaten themselves by birds and other things, and some of them will go on to become these giants. And you're never more than a metre from one of these over summer in my garden. And although they probably don't do a lot of pest management compared to all the other things, I just find them really breathtaking and I just love having them around. Okay, so in the time left, we're going to cover a few other helpful creatures to get to know. Spiders, I know they've got a bad reputation, but spiders, firstly, they're just amazing. The one on the left is a wolf spider, and if you can see what's on its back there, its back is actually like a seething, moving mass because wolf spiders, when they're kind of breeding, they end up with all the babies on their back, and then they're like a school bus, they just hop around and like drop them off in new locations. They're just really amazing spiders. I really like having them around. Someone once said that they look like Chewbacca from Star Wars. And I think I agree with that if you hone in on that face. The one in the middle, I don't know the type of spider, but I wanted to show you they catch stuff. And what spiders do really is they tend to even out whatever there's a lot of. So they're like general predators and they just balance whatever's going on. So you tend not to get these huge peaks in any one thing because the spiders sort of put a lid on them, if you like. And some of them do that by hunting and just sort of roaming around. And then others, like this beautiful St Andrew's cross spider on the right hand side, build these quite complex webs in order to trap things. And yeah, most spiders are not dangerous to us. I know people are very fearful of them, but in our city, there's only a couple of types, like redbacks, for example, you don't want to be bitten by. If you just wear gloves when you're picking up pots and just a little bit of care, you'll be fine. So generally, I'll try to leave spiders be, and I won't clean up their webs unless it's starting to look like Halloween decorations. And just, trust that they're, as well as being food themselves for birds, they're actually doing a great service for the ecosystem as well. Some other predators on the left-hand side here, if you've got good habitat for them, you'll end up with armies of little skinks. And these are my beautiful metallic skinks in the garden. And this is a huge one that I found that was close to 15 centimeters long. And yeah, often to be found hiding along the edges of the raised beds, where they no doubt are consuming all kinds of, hopefully, those small snails and snail and slug eggs and springtails and bits and pieces. So lovely to have, probably not the major pest managers, but yes, certainly useful. And of course, they like to have rocks and crevices to hide in and also to sun themselves on as well in the day. Birds, I've got a video here of a wattle bird doing some insect patrol at home. And you can see it's looking for stuff. Oh, and there it is. So it probably went and got one of those spiders I was just telling you was really important before. But yeah, some things we can maybe look at from that video. Birds like this like to come in and patrol, but they need to have somewhere to perch to feel safe. So as well as trellises for vertical crops in the garden, a lot of them are actually also there because they encourage birds to come in and do patrols. So that's one way that we can help them to feel safe while they're looking for their prey. There was a question earlier in the chat about how to encourage small birds like willy wagtails back into the garden. And the answer to that, partly, is helping them feel really safe and protected. And small insect eating birds feel very safe and protected when they have dense, prickly shrubs, or at least dense shrubs. So I know prickly shrubs are really out of fashion for putting into our gardens, but of course, they really help small birds to feel safe from predators like cats. So if you can, bear having something really prickly like I think Acacia paradoxa would be one of the native ones where I live. But go and ask your local Indigenous nursery, native nursery, it's a good local dense prickly species for small birds, and that will really help. And then of course having lots of nectar flowers, and then a good source of insects. So letting those spiders be, and having the prey around for them as well is really important. Other things around good habitat for small birds would be having quite a lot of layers in the garden. And so people often talk about, we've got all these Indian minor birds and, aggressive bird species in our suburbs. And the rangers that I work with would actually say that, we've actually created perfect habitat for them by having very open gardens that tend to be mostly lawn and large trees. Whereas if we bring lots of dense layers back into the garden and we have lots of shrubs and ground covers and things like that, that changes the architecture, and you get different birds wanting to come in. The other thing, of course, is a water source that they can rely on and something that they feel safe accessing as well. So hanging bird baths, if you can keep them safe and filled, could be good, or a larger pond with a safe perching point in the middle for them to access it could be some ideas. Of course, domestic birds are also fantastic allies for us. I wouldn't want to mess with these chickens on the left-hand side, hey? So as I said before, if you can design your chicken run so that it maybe goes around but not in your veggie beds, or it has fruit trees in the run, that will help to suppress pests and help to break cycles of things like codling moth, which spend part of their life in the soil. And that also includes Queensland fruit fly as well. Codling moth, by the way, is what created this little sad face in the Chinese quince on the right-hand side. And yeah, so the chickens, if they can get to the fallen fruit, will clean up some of those grubs before they manage to come up and start a whole new cycle next year. Chickens, yeah, just to be clear, they do need to be carefully managed because they will rip through your vegetables and dig up plants and eat all your lettuces as well. But they are excellent if they are managed and used in the garden in between crops, where they can clean up pests and yeah, help to spread some manure and yeah, get things ready for the next cycle. Quails do a similar job, a lot gentler on the soil. They can't dig as well as chickens, but for really small gardens, they are an alternative if you don't have the space for a full chook system. Happy to answer more questions about those after the session if you need as well. And I also thought I'd throw in some guinea fowl here. And there's a lovely example here from Edendale Farm in Eltham if you do want to go and have a visit and meet some. I don't have much personal experience with them, but I know that they are supposed to be particularly good for clearing out earwigs and yeah, some of those other insect pests, and not as interested in veggies reportedly as chickens, although yeah, I wouldn't mind trying that personally myself to see if that's true. There is a question in the chat around codling moth and if there's anything particularly effective for them. Deborah, I know what a lot of the organic orchardists do is they will actually band the trunks with a piece of cardboard, and the codling moth reportedly spend some time in the year in there, and then you can remove that and destroy them. So you might want to look up cardboard trunk traps for codling moth and try that out. There are also some commercial products that confuse mating as well. I'm not sure if they are really a thing for home gardeners, but yeah, otherwise running chickens under the fruit trees is the best I can offer for you, unfortunately. All right, moving on to possums. Ringtails, I love them. They're usually a bit less damaging, but brushtails are the ones that we do have, and this is how I tend to see them. Possums tend to do damage like what you can see here. So if you've got really large chunks taken out of usually the top of your trees, that indicates possum. And you can see here, this is, or maybe you can't actually, but this is next to a fence line. So one thing with possums is that the fences and the, you know, power lines and things like that are their highways. And the easiest food for them to access is next to those highways. So not many of us have space these days, but if you did have a larger garden, actually putting your fruit trees away from the fence so that they had to come down to ground level and then go up the tree, that sometimes is enough to deter them, but not in all circumstances. So it's worth observing some of those behavioural things, and sometimes it does lead to a discovery. What we've done at home to manage possums, well, firstly, we tried everything. We tried growing crops specifically for them, but they did not want to share with us. Also tried netting, but unfortunately, the brushtails are strong enough to rip through the nets when there's a tasty fruit on the other side. So eventually what I've ended up doing here is installing a ping string electric fence from a company called SureGuard. And this is it in the photo here. You can see it maybe on the right hand side near the clouds. I circle it here. And this is a low voltage domestic electric fence. So it is not a farm electric fence, which would be illegal and dangerous to install. This is sold to help people contain their own cat or to keep other people's cats or possums away. Yeah, it's something that you can install yourself. This is not for every circumstance, but we grow several $1,000s worth of fruit and veg in our small garden every year. And this system, which I think cost us around about $500, paid for itself very, very quickly and has been very effective against possums ever since we installed it. It has also allowed us to manage rodents. So rodents, let's talk about rodents. So unfortunately, it's a reality when you start growing food that you do attract rodents because they like all the same foods as us. And you can absolutely set traps. And I found traps to be quite effective for mice in particular. Mice are not particularly smart. If you set 3 traps next to each other with bait, as I have done once, um, 2 of them can be full of a dead mouse, and another mouse will still come in and take the last bait. But that does not work with rats, unfortunately, who are very, very clever. The best time for you to try traps and other baiting products is in spring. And so basically now, when we start getting a decline in food sources for a while, they are much less likely to be effective in summer when there's a banquet out there. It will likely get overlooked. So now is a really opportune time. I would never personally use any of the poison baits because unfortunately they will bioaccumulate in the food chain and they could end up harming owls, like predatory birds and things like that as well. I'm going to say, I've had some friends who live along one of the creeks who had a rat infestation. And after trying traps and things for rats, which were not very effective, it's not very nice, but it's an old trick they ended up doing where they got the rats used to eating instant dried mashed potato and then gradually mixed in plaster of Paris. So yeah, pretty nasty one, but they were infested and they wanted to find a solution that would not hurt some of the local bird life and would not then leach into the waterways. And I'm happy to report they did have success with that trick. Yeah. But for us here, another method with this pink string electric fence in place is that we have then been able to allow our cat to patrol within our food garden. So I just need to be really careful here because cats are extremely damaging to wildlife. Domestic cats, everyone thinks it's not their cat. It probably is your cat, unfortunately, is what the research tells us. Uh, and so I'm not advocating here for cats to be allowed to roam free at night. But personally, I feel like there could be a role for cats within contained food garden areas, simply because it is almost impossible to control some of these pests without having some predators on duty. So yeah, we've made that choice, and yeah, sorry to show you that, but yes, a very effective way of managing rats in particular that have been tricky. So pets can have jobs, but it is extremely important that they are contained to protect wildlife. Okay, a few more things for birds. So we want to encourage in the small insect-eating birds, but we also know that birds can be pests, so to speak, themselves. So particularly scratching up young seedlings and things like that when you've just planted, what I tend to do is have a collection of bits of cage and metal and things, and I'll just pop them over my seedlings on the right-hand side until they start to get a bit more established, and then I can take them off again. And that yeah, stops the birds from coming and pinching all my worms and digging up seedlings. And then if you can't get that netting over the tree, then you can also use these small sleeve bag products for fruit as well. Although I will say that some of them are very poorly constructed, and I find very, very easy for rats and things to rip into them. So yeah, this one here's probably an example. It doesn't look particularly sturdy. So just be aware of that and make sure you get a really strong netting product if you do this. Yep. Yeah, there's a comment in the chat, rats just eat through my fruit bags and netting. So look, that's the thing about rats. They can actually chew through metal if they're hungry enough, and definitely through plastic and definitely through netting. So that's, yeah, it's one of those things that it's not a fail safe, but it can deter them and maybe push them onto someone else's crops that are not as well protected. So yeah, unfortunately, none of those is fail safe. One thing worth noting about netting as well is if you reduce the influence of one creature, you create a niche for another. So unfortunately, you bag something like this and you tend to find it's a little protected haven for earwigs or for ants or something else as well. So you can never do just one thing. And there's an expression, nature abhors a vacuum. So unfortunately, yep, there are consequences for all of these choices that we make. Some of the other things you can use for larger pests, I was going to talk a little bit more about netting in here. You may know that we've had some law changes around netting in recent years, and it is actually now illegal to sell nets which are unsafe for wildlife, but many of them still exist out there in the suburbs. So these photos are to show you what's okay and what's not okay. And basically, if you can push a finger through your net, that netting is not safe for wildlife, and you should now let go of that and upgrade to one of the insect grade nets. And these you can get bird nets now, which are also safe for wildlife, but I recommend that you just go straight for the insect gauge nets because of the Queensland fruit fly threat and the fact that you'll probably be needing to have protecting fruit trees, insect netting protecting fruit trees from now on. Yeah, and I'm sorry to show you this photo, but I think it really just hits home for me. And I've had wildlife carers in my classes before, nearly in tears, telling us about all of the creatures that have, been quite damaged through fruit tree netting. So it is really important for gardeners to be aware of and now let go of some of those old nets and upgrade them. And when you are netting, even with a safe net, it's important that you use it safely. So I guess this would be best practice here, although I know sometimes this is hard to achieve. But what we don't want is lots of loose netting that wildlife can get tangled up in or, trapped inside. We don't want nets where they could, fly under them and then get caught and perhaps the predators then waiting for them. So try to get a net that you can get all around the tree and then bunch up and tie really securely like this if possible. If netting's not an option, then for some of the larger predators, and I'd include also talk about rabbits and things in here as well, burrowing pests, I want you to know about something called a floppy fence. And this is a diagram here from my friend Hannah, whose website is down the bottom for you. And this is like a wire mesh barrier. And just note the floppy top here, which is not secured in any way. The idea is that, say, a possum comes and it tries to climb the fence, but it gets to the top and there's a loose overhang that it can't get around. So that is a very effective technique for lots of things that climb. And if you built it, and this one is not actually drawn in this way, but if you built it with a horizontal piece that comes out across underground or across the ground for about 500 mil, half a meter or so, that will also prevent burrowing animals, things like rabbits, from getting in. That's been used successfully to control rabbits in some of our coastal rehabilitation projects out where I work as well. So a floppy fence for some garden contexts might be a better solution, although of course it doesn't stop things from flying into your garden as well. The question here, how do the fruit trees grow and fruit ripen when you have nets on the tree? Yes, so I'm glad you've brought that up. So the nets have to go on after the flowers have been pollinated. You can't have a permanent net around the tree. Otherwise, of course, the insects can't get in and pollinate if it's an insect pollinated tree. And it's also just not good for the growth of the tree because you tend to get all the shoots sort of mangled and twisted under the net anyway. So it's something you put on for a period of time when the fruit is still hard but starting to get larger, and then you take it off, of course, once you harvest the tree. I know there's questions about gall wasps, so I'm going to come back to them at the end of the session just to make sure we can fit everything in if that's okay. And finally in here, a couple more things. It is an option, and especially for people in areas with a lot of wildlife. So some of these sort of peri-urban, kind of getting towards bushland, rural areas, there's so much wildlife there. You may actually have a better time just building a cage and gardening within it. So keep that in mind as an option, like an actual cage structure may be the best thing for you. Obviously much easier to build this before rather than after you set up your garden. So it should be something that happens early on in the planning stage. And finally, I thought I'd just throw this in. If you do have a special tree or two and it doesn't have any fences or anything nearby, of course, in parks, they've had a lot of experience with possums for some time. And these bands that are put around trees at, say about half a meter up to about, it's probably about 2.5 meters, something like that. This is a way of preventing possums from climbing up your trees. So if you do have large trees and they're causing damage, this may be a good option for you. Okay, coming towards the end, talk a little bit about diseases here. The two most common ones that we get in home gardens are the peach leaf curl that also comes on nectarines all the time. And that's the top photograph here. Unfortunately, it's most likely too late for you to manage it this year, even though you haven't probably seen it on the leaves yet, because you need to spray for this one just as the buds start to swell and before the flowers open. So if you can get to the flowers at that time when they're still just buds starting to open, then a copper spray is what's used by organic orchardists to manage it. Unfortunately, it's not effective once the flowers have opened, once the leaves start to come out, and when you see the disease. Uh, that said, often the trees, if they're healthy, will go through a cycle of this disease and then they'll usually recover and you can still have a really good crop actually in some cases, and this tree is still fine. That's if the tree is healthy. So what we need to do is try and make sure there's lots of organic matter in the soil, plenty of water, and the tree's got enough sun and airflow, and that will give it the absolute best chance of pulling through this disease. So it's a little bit about preparation and actually good site selection, making sure that, yeah, they're not in a dark corner and they're really crowded, which would tend to exacerbate that disease. Another common one is powdery mildew on zucchini and other vegetables in the cucurbit family. This one is pretty much a standard and it will show up every single year. It's just a question of whether it comes too early in the season or later once you've already had your crop. So this is one, again, if you've chosen a good site for your plants, if you've made sure they've got good sunshine and airflow, and you've tried to avoid wetting the leaves when you're watering, which can really exacerbate it. And again, if you've made sure the soil is quite healthy, typically I don't worry too much about this one. But if it shows up quite prematurely in the season, then I will do things like cutting off any infected leaves, just making sure that there's good airflow, so not too many leaves bunching up close together or near the soil. That sort of technique just to manage the plant. That's the sort of thing that I tend to do now. Apparently, there is a way of spraying milk on the plants that's diluted, 1 part milk to 10 parts water. And if you put that out on a sunny day, the milk turns into an acid that then attacks the fungus. This is one of the tricks that they use in organic vineyards, where there's a slightly different species, but similar technique as well. So yeah, some little tricks there for disease, but I would say for fungal diseases, generally speaking, fungus likes damp conditions with poor airflow and no sun. So if you kind of try and do the opposite and make sure those plants are put in the right places, then we can suppress these diseases naturally and have a better time with them. Rachel's saying she's found milk sprays can help slow it down. And yes, again, slowing it down is the right phrase here, because we're not going to get complete control, but we can keep it suppressed until we're sick of zucchinis, as I usually am at the end of the season. And I also wanted to say, if you do find that you've got this recurring disease that is making it difficult for you to get a good crop, you do have the option of maybe looking for a cultivar or even maybe a different crop entirely that is resistant to that particular issue. We've all got certain things that just won't work in our sites, and it just, rather than fighting it, can make a lot more sense to try something else instead and then maybe swap with someone who doesn't have that issue. But yeah, fundamentally here we're focusing on good design, soil health, and garden hygiene. Okay, so this is bringing me close to the end of what I wanted to share with you before we get on to any questions you might want to ask. And I want to leave you with a bit of a management strategy of the things that we do most and first and the things that we do least and last. So just recapping, I've just said it, healthy soil and a good garden design with the right plants in the right spot. That has to be the foundation, because if we get that wrong, we tend to exacerbate all the pests and diseases that we've talked about so far. The next thing we'll try and do is create a more balanced ecosystem and attract in predators. And that can be things like having those flowering nectar plants all year round, having that habitat for small insect-eating birds, for example. Those sorts of things will, over time, start to create more diversity, more balance, and allow us to do a bit less work. The next thing we'll do is accept some damage, knowing that it's normal to have leaves that have holes in them or crops that don't work some years. There's a big argument in here for good diversity of crops so that we can just let go of some because it's never a good year for everything. But if it's clear that there's more damage than we can accept and we need to actually do something, then we might start stepping in and doing some hand picking, netting, or other exclusion, or making some homemade traps or sprays. So yeah, generally it's not there's no work in the garden, but it's generally these sorts of things that I do mostly when I'm actually getting active and intervening. And then, as you probably guessed, right at the top, do least and last commercial organic sprays and products. The higher up we go here, the more consequences there are. So yeah, just be very mindful when you're choosing sprays that none of them are completely without impact. And so yeah, that's why we actually try all of these other strategies first before we get there. But they are there nonetheless as an option in the circumstances that you need them. Okay, so we of course can't cover every single pest tonight, although I will stay and answer some questions now if you need. But I did want to highlight my two favorite resources for looking up pests if you need to. And the one on the right is fantastic for organic strategies and general approach. The one on the left has lots of excellent color ID photos of both pests and predators. And yet both highly recommended resources. So that's Garden Pest Diseases and Good Bugs by Dennis Crawford and Bug by Tim Marshall. Okay, and so now we've reached the end of what I wanted to share officially. And I'm going to go just back into a slide here that has an opportunity for you to provide some feedback. And we'll go to some questions now. But I just want to say we really appreciate your feedback and we do look at every single piece that comes through. And it helps us keep the program going because we have some data to show how useful it is to people, but it also helps us make changes. So do let us know how you found tonight. And yeah, we really hope that we'll see you again at another My Smart Garden event soon. I'm going to stop the recording now and then we will be able to get on to some questions.